All right, there we go. Recording is good.
Perfect. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you guys again for having me in as a virtual visiting artist. My name is Lynn Bierbaum. I am a glass artist, photographer, and art instructor in currently residing in Minneapolis, Minnesota. However, I teach just across the border in Wisconsin at the University of Wisconsin River Falls. In today's presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of how my career developed all the way from like my early work, from my undergraduate experience, all the way to kind of the time in between where I was figuring out what my artistic style was outside of school or outside of academia. And then I'll kind of expand more into graduate school, which is where I met Chan, and a bit after grad school as well into what I'm working on currently. So that's kind of the trajectory of our talk today. I also have on here my Instagram page and my website. I'll have that repeated at the end when you have time for questions as well. I do ask you please hold all questions to the end just because I'm already a scatterbrained artist. So it helps to keep me on track that way. All right, so chapter one is my early work. So the image that you see behind is a self-portrait. A lot of my earliest work was focused in self-portraiture and focused around my chronic migraine, so my kind of physical and mental health that I was going through as a college student. And so this piece that I made was one of my early darkroom prints. So this is a silver gelatin print that was made through double exposure by making it with two enlargers using two different negatives and overlaying it onto one single piece of paper. The image behind the portrait was actually a graphic design exercise I was doing in class. And the reason that I had overlaid that on top was because the words skin and body, I felt actually started to communicate more of um, how disoriented I felt in my skin or within my body. And the image of the self-portrait behind showed kind of that light sensitivity that occurs with ocular migraines and that kind of shadow beside. So I was already playing with a lot of these themes of identity that you'll see kind of congruent throughout my entire career. There we go. So early on in my career, I love to travel. This is something that growing up, I grew up where my dad worked for the airlines. So I was always able to travel and explore different cultures. I lived in different countries for part of my life. And so exploring different places and understanding other cultures was a large part of my upbringing, but also moving a lot was a large part of it too. So when I was in undergrad, I had the opportunity to do a study abroad where I took a full semester and I traveled and took images and just made a full series of work. It had to be around a certain core theme or idea, and it had to be around a certain location. I was always fascinated with Venice, Italy, and like the masquerade event that they had there as well, the Venetian Biennale. And so their events and this materiality of the creative arts was such a huge part of Venice. So I wanted to understand more of what Venice meant to Venetians. So I went there for 2 months and I interviewed all of these local Venetians and asked them what Venice meant to them. And I photographed them with clients in their work at their home. I would go to family gatherings and meals, and I became like a part of this Venetian community throughout those 2 months. And it was a really great opportunity to kind of understand photography as a communicative tool and express myself through an image making process because process was something that I was so fascinated by. These images were shot digitally and then printed in platinum palladium. Early on in my undergraduate career, I started to explore with alternative processes, and platinum was actually the first process that I was introduced to, which anyone who knows alternative processes, platinum palladium is not the easiest one to begin with. So I definitely jumped in the deep end. So these are not the most perfect prints. There's a lot of hazing and kind of shadows that are within them. But this was kind of my first jump into a larger, more extreme process based photographic work. And the thing I loved about it was you may notice on the very edge where the image meets the frame, you can even see the brush strokes. And that's part of the tactile, handmade quality of these images that I was so fascinated by, even early on in my artistic career. It was around this time that I also found what I like to call my poison nowadays, which is wet plate collodion. Wet plate collodion, I started in about 2016 and I was entirely self-taught. My instructor at the time had never worked in wet plate. He said he would never touch it with a 10-foot pole because of just how complicated it was and how environmentally challenged it could be, right? If it wasn't in prime summer and you didn't have bright UV light, it sometimes wouldn't expose fully. If it's too cold, the plate could actually freeze during the process. And so there's a lot of challenges and quirks with the process. But I also loved how you could see all of those challenges, those marks on the physical plate itself. And now that I've done the process for so many years, I like that I'm able to actually see a plate and I can understand what the marks mean within the process. So, going into that a tiny bit, the image of these are actually my family. So, on the left-hand side is my mother, right-hand side is my father, and in the middle is my sister. On my mother's plate, you can see there's a lot of kind of veining coming from the edges. And that was actually because my plate holder that I had used for the process, so what held the physical plate inside the camera, was contaminated. I hadn't cleaned it well enough. It was dirty. It had silver marks inside there. And so those chemical markings were because of just dirty materials. So all of those different parts of the process could be seen on the physical image itself. And that's what really drew me to this process as I continued my entire career. You'll notice this process come back quite often. In undergrad, this was also where I first started to explore the third dimension. Prior to this collaboration that I did in a studio photography class with a ceramic artist named Blake Stopelstead, prior to this, I only had ever printed on two-dimensional surfaces. Granted, they were a variety of material types. I'd printed on wood, I'd printed on metal and glass, but I had never had to try to print on something that wasn't flat or wasn't like completely symmetrical in any way. And so this was that first challenge into it. The chemistry that I used for this process was a chemical called liquid light, which is essentially a silver gelatin emulsion similar to the papers you guys would use in the darkroom, except for the silver emulsion that's on the paper is just in its liquid form. You can heat up that liquid and coat it onto whatever surface material you desire, dependent on its like porency. So this piece was glazed with glass, so it didn't have any sort of fibrous material that it would want to absorb into. So it laid on the surface of that ceramic. And you might even notice kind of hiding within those images are handprints as well, because I was so focused on this idea of the tactile quality of imagery in making and how I could communicate that these were handmade objects or handmade images without uh, without necessarily just having it be a digital photograph, right? Trying to push the boundaries of what photography is known to be outside of that traditional two dimension. This all led to my BFA show in 2017. So in 2017, I graduated with my BFA in photography with a secondary emphasis in graphic design. Except for this final semester was when I also had taken glass blowing, and we'll talk about that kind of and how that got shaped and developed throughout my career as well. In my BFA show, it was all focused on people, places, and memories that make up who I am. And so I was very focused on everything being traditional photography, all film, no digital at all. This was 100% done through a analog means. So all of those prints were shot on 4x5 black and white film, processed, and then printed as platinum palladium prints. And then I had printed using liquid light on that round mirror. I had then created this kind of box pinhole camera and photographed a self-portrait onto that liquid light. And then the last objects in my BFA show were these two items on the pedestal. The plate was actually a reliquary or a relic from my great grandmother, it was. And so this was something that had been passed down through my family and generations. And I actually printed an image on the center of that plate, forever altering its existence, but kind of embracing and remembering its lineage and its connection to family. And then the second item on there was a clock, which was made by my grandfather, who I'll kind of bring up again later on as another inspiration in the work. And on the clock on the backside was actually an image of a dog printed on there. And here's a kind of close-up of those two uh, reliquaries or relic objects from my family. And the image that I printed in the center of the glass plate was a from a small 35 millimeter film of my mother doing cookie baking back in, I believe, this 1970s. So a good image of family onto a family relic or object as well. As I mentioned, it was at this time, that final graduating semester, that I learned glass blowing. Glass blowing, I fell in love with very quickly because of the process side of it, right? It was something that took repetition, just like playing an instrument, just like practicing painting, drawing, any form of material, photography. It took practice and it took just time working with the material in the studio. And so after I graduated from River Falls, I found it was actually much easier to get a job in glass blowing than it was in darkroom photography. So I ended up going and getting a full-time job working as a make your own instructor, teaching community members how to make their own glass. So that was kind of what I did after uh, my undergraduate experience. So that leads me to chapter two, the time in between. So I consider the time in between the time where I started to develop myself as an independent artist, because I knew coming out of undergrad that I wanted to be a teacher. I loved as a getting to be a TA for my classes and getting to share my passion for process with others. And so I knew that teaching was what I wanted to go into, but I didn't feel like I could teach someone how to be a practicing artist if I never did it myself. So I ended up taking a few years off. I think it was about 5 or 6 years in between my undergraduate and graduate experience to really develop my work. And that's kind of what this section is about. So, as I mentioned, from the time I graduated undergrad in about 2017 till about 2019, I was working in Minneapolis at a glass studio called Minnesota Center for Glass Arts, FOSI. I actually still work there now. Took a few years off and came back. But while I was there, I worked as a photographer and I also worked as that make your own instructor. So I was teaching people how to make glass, photographing, and still trying to be a part of both communities at the same time. It was around the same time period in about 2017, 2018 that I started working with Analog Forever magazine, which has grown immensely since that time when I first kind of started working with them. But they started to create this large following of analog darkroom-based photographers who shared their work together online and created critique groups and had exhibitions. And so I was communicating and participating virtually with the photographic community while in person participating and working within the glass communities. So I was kind of working on both sides in tandem, basically for the rest of my artistic career and even into today. I still kind of view glass and photography as kind of both of my two worlds. During that time, I really focused on trying to just refine the fundamentals of glass and understand the material nature of it. I was also very fascinated as soon as I found out there was a tool that are cork paddles, which can essentially allow me to flatten the glass, flatten either side so that it is like printable surfaces, right? Just like if I was printing on sheet glass, just like if I was trying to print on a piece of paper. So now I could start to combine this glass blowing process that I had found a passion and a fascination for into my photography realm. So I started doing some experiments, but not being in school anymore makes it so that you definitely need to find alternatives. So I got to building and I found alternatives to dark rooms. So this was my first dark room outside of undergrad. It is my bathroom. And you can see my sink was my processing station. And this is wet plate collodion, by the way, in my bathroom. So a very extensive darkroom process. And so you can see I had the trays and the sheet laid out, and this worked, right? I was able to do some tests and figure out how to actually print onto these three-dimensional forms. These were two of my first collodion sculptures. They were very focused around a trip that I had taken with two of my best friends working for various glass studios around Europe. We took about 3 months, as long as we could go without needing a visa. And we worked for various glass studios, just offering them free help. Like, hey, you want free assistance for a week? We're there. And so we started working for these people, and I documented the entire process. And so these documentations through these photographs became the inspiration behind the vessels that were created. Shortly after that trip or returning home and doing these experiments, I was reached out to by a former instructor named Dan Estabrook, who uh, had done many workshops and had taught at Penland School of Craft. And he was like, I know the kind of work that you're making right now, and I have a friend who's looking for a studio assistant. I think you two might pair up pretty well. Would you be interested in going to Penland School of Crafts for 2 months? uh, Unpaid, but you get free room and board, you get free food, and you have no tuition costs for an entire 2 months to just make your artwork. Sold. I'll take it. So I ended up going off to Penland School of Crafts for about 2 months, working with the gal in the middle here, whose name is Jill Enfield. Jill Enfield is a world-renowned photographer who specializes in alternative processes, and I learned so much from her. Throughout the 2 months, I got up early, I set up all the chemistry, I learned how to manage a darkroom and how to recycle chemistry, maintain chemistry, and understand more of the studio ethics behind running a darkroom or running more of a managerial side of it. Throughout that course, she explored and taught many different alternative processes where I was able to kind of expand and understand how I could start to combine these various alternative processes with glass. So on the left-hand side, you can see some tin types as well as wet plate on glass. The blue sheets of glass are actually a process called cyanotype on glass, and the kind of gray image is a toned cyanotype. and the bottom two are albumin prints, which is similar to salt printing, but another alternative form that creates this almost sepia tone using egg as actually a binder. So all of these kind of chemistry process-based techniques are all starting to kind of grow within what I like to say are my tool belt, right? All those skills within that tool belt as well. And then on the right hand side was more paper prints, refining and testing and understanding even more alternative processes while I had access to such a plethora of knowledge through Jill. While I was at Penland, I spent many hours assisting and working with the class, but after hours would shut down, I started focusing on this collaborative series that I was starting prior to even going to Penland. So prior to going to Penland, I had built these vessels that vary in size from about 14 inches tall to about 8 inches tall. And I made these with my friend Thai Pratumwan, who is Thai. And I had gone out to Thailand with my family just on a vacation or a trip, and I was mesmerized by their sculptures and by their line movement throughout many of their religious monuments and temples. So I talked with Thai a bit, and I started to understand more about their iconography and the symbolism behind some of these different gods and deities. And so we created what we called Thai appreciation. We worked together to come up with the design, and then I printed the images onto the surface during my time at Penland. And this work has been shown both nationally and internationally since its creation. After my time at Penland, I kind of continued on with this nomadic lifestyle for a bit. I started taking contracted jobs in glass blowing, just 3 months, 6 months, 9 months at a time. And I was moving from state to state, just working for glass studios while still communicating and working with Analog Forever magazine online and continuing to make my darkroom prints anywhere I went. I had the opportunity to go down to Phoenix, Arizona, and work for a glass blowing studio out there. And while I was there, they gave me the opportunity to take over a bathroom in their cold shop to turn it into, again, a personal darkroom. So the darkroom exploration began again. So this time I turned a bathroom into a functioning darkroom. Here you can see on the bottom right-hand side was kind of the start of the bathroom. I'd bought some cabinets at a restore that I could store chemistry as well as materials and supplies in. I built countertops on the top just by going to Home Depot and getting some wood cut and had bought a secondhand shelf to have extra supplies. From there, I kind of made it more darkroom-esque by painting everything matte black and putting through some wiring so that I had more outlets and bringing in all of my supplies, including my enlarger, my safe light, which at the time was a table lamp that I covered in ruby lith tape, which ruby lith is the light-sensitive material that prevents any light sensitive material from getting exposed, essentially. So it's a little bit of a jury rigged way to make a safe light, but it functioned all the same. And I strung up some wire and clothespins so that I could hang dry any prints that I had created. And this became my home studio for about 6 months while I was living and working down in Phoenix. To show a little bit of the process and how these various sculptures actually get created, or the first thing I do is I tape off the entire glass form once it's cooled down to room temperature. I don't apply any of the imagery onto the glass while it is hot, just because it would immediately burn away. So I have to make sure that the glass is cold prior to applying on any images. From there, I tape off the entire glass form and cut out using an X-Acto just where I want the image to be located. From that point, I use a digital positive or a digital negative. So I photograph everything digital and then I'm able to print them off and expose them onto the light sensitive chemical of the collodion. So it's kind of modernizing the traditional wet plate collodion process. It's not only using film or only using historic based processes, but I'm combining using digital based technologies in combination with this historic chemistry to create these sculptural pieces. Once the chemistry is applied on and it's exposed using that enlarger light, as you can see on the left-hand side, where the negative or positive is laid in contact with the object's chemistry. From that point, it's basically developed and fixed so that it is no longer light sensitive. And you can see the rinse cycle there on the right-hand side, where all of that extra fixative is being removed from the surface of the chemistry. This series was created when I was living down in Phoenix called Holding Hands, and it was kind of a reflection on this nomadic lifestyle that I was living and how I was building a lot of friendships with people, but I wasn't able to keep any of them close because of just the quick timing of our interactions, right? Only knowing someone for 2 months or 3 months, it's hard to build those similar connections. So I built this series of still lives of people's hands holding objects. And to me, each of these pieces actually represented people throughout my life that I shared specific memories with. So to me, each of these are specific people, but to everyone else, it's completely open to interpretation and your own memories of these maybe symbols or objects, right? Playing with that idea of iconography and symbolism through objects. After that time, I continued to explore these sculptural pieces that I was making, and I was trying to figure out what was next in life. Around this time, I was starting to build a portfolio for graduate school. I started to feel confident in having had a few exhibitions under my belt, had some publications, did some curatorial experience with my online community through Analog Forever. And I started to feel like, all right, it might be time for graduate school. So to reflect on that, I built these two pieces called Telling Hands. And I went through an online course studying palmistry to understand how our emotions are connected to our physical selves. And so through that online course and through some of my readings on palmistry, I came up with basically these predictions of my past self and my future self, right? This became understanding it further now, more of like a art therapeutic exercise for myself at that time when I felt really lost and not knowing what was next in life. And so this piece was me trying to figure out who I was and where I wanted to go. And so on the right hand side, you can see that is kind of my past self. And then on the left hand side was my future self or where I wanted to be. Before going off to graduate school, I also had the opportunity to attend the Experimental Photo Festival in 2021 and 2022. And this was a life-changing experience. And that's not even minimizing it at all. At this conference, which was workshop driven, and they also had conferences where people talked about their different experimental techniques, but no two people were making the exact same work at this conference. Everyone was doing something different within the world of photography, and people were pushing the boundaries and the boxes of what photography can be and what photography has been in history and how we can modernize all of these different historic techniques. And so on the left-hand side is the entire group from 2021, which has only grown in size since. And on the right-hand side is a workshop that I had taken doing lumen prints. And so we were using some hand-drawn negatives as well as some color prints to create lumen photographs, which are just sun prints, essentially burning the silver of the paper. During the Experimental Photo Festival, I was actually invited out through my connection with Analog Forever magazine as a invited artist and instructor. So throughout that time, I got to teach this wonderful group of students how to modernize wet plate collodion. And so we made wet plate prints only using enlarger light and digital negatives and creating prints on glass. And so this was many of their first experience working in wet plate. And this was a 1 day, 8 hour class. So wet plate's not something that is usually learned in a day. It's something that takes many, many weeks of practice, if not years of practice. And so I was really proud to see that these students were able to make successful work even within an 8 hour time period. I had never done a class like this prior, so it was a big kind of leap of faith, and it ended up being successful. And I ran it both 2021 and in 2022. And I want to go back eventually, but just not able to at this time. But I'll be back at Experimental Photo Festival one day. While I was at Experimental Photo Festival, I also had the opportunity to take classes as well as teach classes. And so one of the classes that I took was lasergrams with Ghoul. Ghoul is a phenomenal artist and instructor working out of New York City, but from Italy. And she showed me this technique called lasergrams, in which you take glass objects, and she usually uses like cut glass that you can find just at a thrift store or an antique shop. Or for me, I brought broken glass from the hot shop and I refracted a cat laser pointer, right? So one of those green cat laser pointers, and it refracted the light through the glass, and you would refract it onto the light sensitive paper, creating all of those line markings onto the paper surface. This had me fascinated because I was so fascinated in how light could just be used as a tool for image making without even needing any sort of a camera, right? Being able to create photography or imagery without any camera was something I wanted to explore further. So that brings me to chapter 3, graduate school. At this time, going to grad school felt like the right moment because I was stuck as to what I wanted to do, but I was also very excited from the experience that I had just had at Experimental Photo Festival, literally 2 weeks before moving to Rochester, New York from Minnesota to start my start my graduate experience. So here on the left-hand side, you can see is a picture of one of my cats. I have two cats at home here with me, but the one pictured here is named Jax after glass blowing tool. And they were my emotional support animals throughout grad school. Hopping into kind of some of my earlier work in grad school, I was exploring a lot with materiality and translucency, thinking about fabric and how I could combine that with the various processes that I had learned throughout my time in between undergraduate and graduate school. And so I started to work with print size. I started to work with what I wanted to be glass, what I wanted to be imagery. And I was also early on in graduate school pushed away from sculpture. And being pushed away from sculpture in graduate school just made me understand how much it became integral to my work throughout the last few years. I had been a photographer longer than I had been a glass artist, but yet I realized that the few years that I had been working in glass and exploring these two techniques, they had become so intertwined that I had struggled to break them apart. And so realizing that push away from sculpture made me realize that I needed it, that it wasn't something that could be separated from my photographic work. So that brought me back to the lasergrams. It brought me back to thinking, how does glass and photography connect without the use of a camera? So working in the glass program or working with the glass program at RIT, because I was in the photography department, but had built friendships and ties with the professors and the fellow graduate students within the glass program. So I would build work in the glass studio and start to kind of experiment how I could warp and bend imagery through the materiality of glass. So these two images are a great example of how you can warp and bend imagery through just the optical properties of glass. So that focal length or that depth of field is kind of what I'm playing with, and how the optics actually warp and shift or blur or focus certain areas of the photograph, and whether I could play with this further within my imagery as well. In that same glass blowing class, I ended up starting to think how I could create glass pieces that weren't canvases for my imagery, but ways to actually incorporate them in different avenues together through the common medium of light. So this piece here, Flickering Flame, was designed to be basically a candlestick that kept all of those kind of hardships, those negative thoughts inside. And so when I was making this piece, I put the metal key inside while it was hot, and I closed up the opening so that key's forever stuck inside unless the glass piece were to break or be broken open. And the metal slowly starts to degrade and chip away into smaller fragments in the bottom of the glass form as well as it ages. When I displayed this piece, I had the inspiration of it representing a flame through light. So I recorded a candle as it melted and played it back while the glass was spinning. So here is a video of this glass piece in its installation format. So there's a video projection being played over the glass as it spins. And I'll let you see what that looks like here. So I'm starting to think about the refractions of light. I'm starting to think about ways in which I can play with symbolism and iconography in this imagery while still utilizing abstraction, right? Still utilizing the translucent material of glass to warp and bend that image. And I also loved how, as the light moved or as the glass object moved through the light, it looked or mimicked almost smoke as it were to come off of the candle. And this kind of started to develop the starting inner workings of my thesis exhibition. From that point, early on in my second year of graduate school, this is when Chan started at RIT as well. And I believe we were in this class together, the color darkroom class. And this, I started to push the idea of lasergrams even further, right? Starting to push this idea of the material nature of glass and the optics of glass being the source of the imagery. And so the print on the left-hand side was utilizing a red, green, and a blue cat laser pointer and shining it through this glass goblet that was made by David Schnuckel, the glass professor at RIT that I was assisting and working with closely at that time. And I refracted the light through the glass object and recorded its light markings onto the photographic paper. Because the three different tones of light, it communicated magentas and yellows and greens and blues. And I was able to achieve basically this rainbow effect through only using light and glass. And that material memory kind of started getting me to look not at the objects itself, but what could the glass objects create, right? What sort of light marks could glass create through its refractions, through the hesitations and the marks made by the maker? Can those be projected through light as a medium? So going back again to the origin of photography, right? Drawing or painting with light. So I had to start making, and I had to start making a lot. So in the glass studio, I was making kind of these two different forms to communicate my thesis work. The first form that I was making is that rounded plate, which is called a rondelle in the glass world. And these were basically flat, round discs that I would be able to print images onto, as well as chemical markings to play with abstraction through and literal imagery through symbolism and iconography. The other objects are bell jars. I was doing a lot of research into kind of isolation and solitude through this idea of dementia and Alzheimer's, because so often dementia and Alzheimer's patients feel like they're so alone in a world that might feel like they're never left alone. Right. And so there's a lot of those elements in this repetition of memories repeated over and over, but how we also lose memory so often over time that I knew repetition was a large part of what I was trying to communicate. So the bell jars in repetition as well as the rondelles. The bell jar started to develop into these kind of reliquaries where I wanted to capture what felt like a moment frozen in time. And I wanted it to connect to certain memories throughout my life, right? Thinking back to the idea of dementia and Alzheimer's, how they slowly fade over time. I did a lot of research into memories, and I did a lot of research at that time. Um, Grounding my work more into psychological theory too, on how memories begin to fade naturally, right? What we remember are sometimes some of the most important times because they're recollected back to our current thinking over and over and over. So that repetition again became apparent. And so these bell jars were my tests to figure out materiality. I was printing some digital prints. I was printing some darkroom prints. I was printing some on fabric. I was printing some on transparency. And I was just experimenting with material and seeing what sort of materials worked best within the glass for the translucent nature that I was looking for, but also to achieve that glass ice-like effect. And all the text above are lists of memories that I had created as kind of fuel for each of the bell jars. Then I started exploring further into kind of the family archive and understanding uh, where my own personal memories came from. And so I ended up using my family farm, which my father and my grandparents and my ancestors had all grown up living on until my grandfather and my grandmother decided to sell it off when I was about 2 years old. I grew up hearing stories about the farm and hearing all about what it was like to grow up on a farm, but I grew up in the suburbs. So I never fully connected, and I built this kind of imaginatory idea of what the farm was within my mind and just kind of filled in those gaps over time. About 24 years later, I was able to go back to this family farm for the first time since I was 2 years old, and I realized how different it was than what I had imagined or what I had built up in my mind over time. And so that inspired the imagery that went into my thesis work. So these images are all taken either from my family archives or images that I had photographed out at the farm the day I had gone, 24 years later. I started printing these images onto the rondelles for my installation because I had been pushing my work into the sculptural realm, but it had only ever lived on a pedestal or it had only ever lived in the round. And I wanted it to be an immersive experience for people to walk underneath or to actually look up at and feel like they were immersed within the work. So I started printing multiple images onto these rondelles. I think in the end, I made about 105 of these rondelles for the work. And here you can see once I had finished printing them, this was fresh out of the chemistry, still dripping wet from the rinse. And you can see how the chemistry is all nice and even. But sometimes, if the process is rushed, or as a graduate student, if you're sleep deprived and haven't had enough to eat in the day, then sometimes you don't end up processing all the way that you should. And this piece ended up fading. And I love it. The reason that I love the fading of the chemistry is because it connects immediately back to what I was trying to talk about with the series. I was trying to communicate how memories fade over time, that what we remember in the moment that it happens is never the same after that moment passes. And so, from the moment that that piece was made, still dripping wet from the chemistry, to 2 years later when I redocumented the piece, I'm able to see all of those shifts and changes from even when this piece was made, either within my own personal mindset or within the piece itself. And here were a couple more of the image plates that were included throughout the installation. I believe I had 13 or 14 image plates total throughout the installation, as well as chemiogram plates that were just using the chemistry on the surface of the glass object. Once I had the pieces made, from that point, I had to basically prep. I had to understand how these objects would hang. I had to understand how many I needed, where they would be laid out, the distance between the plates, whether they would be touching or not. And so, uh, Chan can attest to this. Basically, the final, I want to say 6 months before the actual exhibition, I wasn't making very much. I was very much focused on building pedestals, getting panels ready, and figuring out how the heck I was going to install this thing. On the right-hand side, you can actually see this is a clothes rack that I had in my studio that had a piece of white mat board on the bottom that I practiced hanging the glass pieces so I could figure out distance. I could figure out how the refractions would be projected onto the wall surface, onto the ground. And this was kind of my mobile mock-up unit that I used within my studio before getting a larger space where I was able to lay things out on the floor and pin things to the ceiling, as you see on the left-hand side. Here I am prepping all of the parts and pieces to the installation. So it was way more than just creating images for my work. I had to build every component that went into the installation. So the pedestal that held the bell jars was, I knew I wanted them to glow from the inside because light was a large component of this series. And so I had to build the pedestal. So I built the exterior and had a false panel on the inside that had LED strips running all the way across. And I built a top to be adhered onto it and punched holes through it so that the light would project through onto the bell jars. All of the white panels were hung in the crossbars so that the glass plates could be hung to them. So this was kind of the chaos prep mode that developed about 2 months before the exhibition happened. And here are some of my mock-up designs using some of my graphic design knowledge, or the bare bones basics thereof, and starting to figure out layouts and spacing and Not being a huge mathematical person, I really focused a lot on my visual awareness and being able to kind of understand the space in which I was working in. And here it is. This was the final thesis exhibition. In the end, there were over 70 glass plates hanging throughout the exhibition, and I had 24 bell jars on the custom underlit pedestal that I had built as well. And the cutouts on the flooring actually map and mimic the refractions from the glass plates hanging above to really make it feel like an immersive experience as soon as you step onto that flooring or you step onto that paneling, you feel like you're immersed within the environment or the work. And here are just a few examples of some documentary shots throughout the exhibition. So there you can see kind of that combination of imagery plates and chemiograms. Some ducks. And here, got to give photo credit to Chan on these ones here. Uh, And so you can see people were able to actually stand underneath, and you can see a little bit better on the scale of it as well. But people were encouraged and invited to sit on the floor pillows and to spend time with the work, right? As people spent time within the installation, the glass plates would slowly spin and they would chime as they would hit one another. And so it became this very calming space that people could sit in and reflect upon their own memories and their own kind of familial experiences or familial connections. Going in a little bit deeper into the second part of that thesis work is the bell jars. So the bell jars were, as I mentioned, largely inspired by my family farm. And so this image is from my family archives of aerial view of that farm, which is very traditional in a lot of farming families, especially here within the Midwest, because people wanted to communicate property lines. They wanted to communicate whose was what, right? And so this image here was really the only image that I had to go off of for many years to understand what the farm was. And so I used this image 24 times in each of the bell jars. So it was repeated once in each of the 24 bell jars to communicate that kind of loss of memory over time. So as the bell jars got bigger, the distortions started to become more extreme. So coming back to the bell jars, these were some of the final pieces that ended up in the thesis exhibition, where the images were printed as inkjets, archival pigment prints on silk, and then encased in resin and the blown glass bell jars. And you can still see that kind of remnant of the farm aerial view of the farm, while the threads, the silk, are starting to fade away as well. And here is more of a document view of it in the gallery space as well. Really mimics that ice, right? I wanted it to feel like it was a moment frozen in time, and nothing communicates that better than ice. All right, moving out of graduate school into kind of the next chapter of life. So after I graduated from uh, RIT and got my MFA in photography and related media, I had the opportunity to actually go back to my alma mater or my undergraduate school, so the University of River Falls, and I came back as an art lecturer. At this time, I was able to teach introductory or appreciation courses talking about the elements of art, principles of design, and the bare bones basics of why art is important in society and for our own mental health. I also teach photography classes, graphic design classes, and run our equipment cage now coming up. So, in my time as an art lecturer out at the University of River Falls, I also had the opportunity to teach a class in what I love, wet plate collodion. So, I got to teach a summer class for 3 weeks, and it was 7 hours every day for 5 days. It was like a wet plate marathon, and it was exhausting, but it was a great opportunity to get to share again those passions with students. And here's some of my student work as well. This student's name is Judas Peace, and they were working on making still lives for the first project. We were doing spirit photography inspiration in the second project, and then the third one was entirely open to them to make whatever glass negatives they decided. And so she did it focused on the hear no evil, speak no evil, see no evil. Here, I also work a lot with our University of Wisconsin River Falls Photography Club. And so these are a few of my goofballs that I claim as my students. And we had the opportunity last spring to attend the Society for Photographic Education National Conference in Reno, Nevada. And we had 4 students, and here they are getting their portfolios reviewed by some other educators out at the conference. Just on the floor, hanging out and getting some work critiqued and understanding 4x5 cameras and cyanotypes. During this time as well, after graduate school and moving back to Minnesota, I also had the opportunity. I was very glad to be around family because my grandfather was dealing with severe dementia at this time. And so his dementia that led into Alzheimer's made him afraid of being alone, made him afraid of these moments of solitude. And it started to really have me fascinated with how some people can be so afraid of being alone with their own thoughts, and other times it can be very calming and relaxing, as I've always found being alone to be. So I was processing these emotions through photography. And that kind of developed this series of film soup images that I had made in my grandparents' home while we were in the process of moving them into a memory care facility. And so it was a lot of labeling items of which was going to whose rooms and kind of letting go with this house that had been a part of my family since I could remember. Since the farm was something that I had only imagined, this was the home that I knew. And so the kind of haziness that and the soft color shifts that film souping was able to achieve kind of showed this emotional confusion in that process as well. And I also photographed in 35 millimeter black and white throughout the process of moving them out of their home as well. And so here are some images of just like the remnants of furniture after moving it out and just the markings that it was left on the carpet. The way that you could hazily see through the slightly dirty curtains or the kind of wood shop environment that was something that was always special to him. So I was starting to play with more of these like soft, quiet moments that felt more intimate and personal. I also needed to get out. I needed to get out into nature. Being back in the cities was also a bit of a change for me, as I much prefer to be out in nature. And so being back in the cities, anytime we had winter breaks, summer breaks, I would go up to Lake Superior, or what we like to call in Minnesota, up north, where up north is where all of our lakes, rivers, and a lot of our nature elements are. And so I kind of go up there and kayak, hike, and just kind of try to immerse myself within the natural environment. And that kind of explored me into understanding why I like to take the imagery that I do. And so I started just taking photographs that I liked to take photos of without anyone telling me what I should be taking photos of. And so that's where this kind of series of work was developed in combination with the work I was creating in reflection with my grandparents' movement. A lot of my images were also balancing interior and exterior spaces and thinking about human connection to nature as escaped for solitude. And this all culminated into a solo show that I had in January of 2025 through March of 2025 at FOSI, the Minnesota Center for Glass Arts, where I had a solo show called Echoes. And this was entirely new work made from the images I had shot up in Lake Superior, as well as some of the imagery inspired from my grandparents. So this is a overall image of my solo exhibition at FOSI, the Minnesota Center for Glass Arts. It's about half their gallery space and it incorporates two movable walls and two solid walls. And I brought back my custom pedestal. It needed some edges put on just as it had some wear and tear from the movement from New York. But the bell jar series came back, and then I played further with lasergrams and new sculptural shelf pieces that you can see on the right-hand side. Starting to explore other glass techniques as well was something that I started to expand upon after graduate school. I had this kind of never-ending need to learn. And so from that point, I kept taking classes. So I took fusing classes and flame working, which is using a torch or very finite flame to create glass objects. And I started to learn more about the material of glass and how I could combine it with my imagery. So these are some fused panels. I did not make these panels. I purchased them from a fellow artist, and I kind of came up with the design with them. And then I found the images from my time up in Lake Superior and wanted to connect that to that sense of solitude while also thinking about how we connect to nature. And so these pieces are 32 inches long. So they are quite big in size. They're about 8 inches wide and 2 inches in depth. And this was the process of creating them. I used that same sort of black electrical tape that I used on my previous sculptural forms and just wrapped it around the sections that I didn't want the image to be printed onto. And I did use an assistant. One of my wet plate students, Quinn, held the glass while I poured the chemistry onto it, and we worked together in the darkroom. And here they are hung up on the gallery wall, starting to think about how I could project light to create the images. And so the glass objects become more the vessels for the light. And here's another image of them as well from an angle. And here's some of the darkroom prints that were also included within that exhibition. Some from my family home and others from the adventures up north. And these were also included within that Echoes series. So I started to think about, well, why do I have to print on glass? I could still print on traditional paper if the process and the image needed it. So starting to kind of come back from my high horse and understand that I should use all the tools in my tool belt, right? Not just what is my most well-known or most prevalent within my work. Here are some more traditional kind of sculptures that were included within that Echo series. I was making these pieces at the time of the wildfires in LA in January, and it was something that I was having a really hard time dealing with, not being able to express this frustration, and express kind of this sorrow of loss of natural environment, loss of homes, loss of people's livelihood. And so these three pieces were made in inspiration from those wildfires, but still in connection with the Echoes series. They were all being made still in or being prepared prior to the wildfires, but they were being made while the wildfires are going on. So it was kind of in the forefront of my mind. Then I went on a wet plate road trip as well. This happened just this summer. I had a bit of time off, and so I decided to challenge myself and take wet plate on the road. So I packaged everything up in my car, took my camera, took my chemistry, and my portable dark room, and I hit the road. Ended up going about 41 hours round trip in this road trip. Started in Minneapolis and ended up going through Iowa and Nebraska all the way down to Colorado and then up through Wyoming, and kind of down back around through South Dakota in the Badlands region. No idea why Google Maps put the world's only corn palace in there. I missed that on the route, but I wish I had seen the world's only corn palace. Next time, next time. And then back to Minneapolis for my total road trip. And it was about 6 days. So I definitely took my time. I didn't push it. And I spent about 2 days in Colorado Springs as well, just shooting out there. This was my setup. And so being used to kind of jury-rigged makeshift dark rooms, I had built this box previously with my father and hadn't really utilized it as much as I had wanted to, and finally decided to take it out. And so it fits two trays in there and a silver dip tank in the back. And then I have a recycle jug and trash bin and fixin' water outside of the dark room. So it all fits, it all works, but it definitely is a little snug in the trunk. And here were some images from that road trip as well. And these were all tin types, 4x5, so printed on metal using the wet plate collodion process. Last chapter is what is next. So now I'm kind of just in my production phase of life, is what I'm saying. So I'm not making as much like fine artwork. I'm more focused on making products that I can try to sell in galleries and uh, smaller shows. And so I'm working with a process called laser fired decals, which I can actually fire right onto fused glass in a kiln. And that's what you can see here were some tests that I had done with a class and some larger prints that I had done with a test, finding different toners, creating different densities, and creating these bud vases. So trying to create functional products, incorporating both my imagery and my glass now. I'm also doing a bit of experimentation and tests with a new process called Kirlian photography. I'd taken a 1 day workshop at a photo studio called Praxis in Minneapolis here. And it's essentially using electricity to shock the organic compounds or the conductive material in different objects. So, plant life has water, and so that is a conductor that conducts the electricity. Metal is a conductor, our hands, right? And so I'm able to play with all of these various conductor materials to create imagery on silver gelatin or light sensitive paper. And so I got a Kirlian device myself after many months of research, and I'm now working on creating a new series of Kirlian photographs that I'm still building, experimenting, and understanding through this process. And here are a couple of those as well. You can see the electricity actually projecting off from my hands and the nature or natural elements that are produced inside. And here are a couple more as well. And depending on the humidity or the amount of moisture that is actually in the natural organic matter, so the leaf or the flowers ends up projecting more electricity or less. And I can also change the intensity of the electricity pulses. And it doesn't hurt, I promise. It just feels like a static shock that just happens for 5 seconds long. I'm also still taking a lot of hot shop glass blowing portraits, so I'm starting to try to understand and embrace digital technologies even more and start to develop more of a digital portfolio of work. So my digital portfolio of work is still predominantly focused around glass blowing and the process of glass making, but showing kind of other makers in the studio as well. So I photographed glass blowing, as you see here, neon tube bending, flame working, and fusing. So I'm starting to experiment with photographing makers in all different areas of glass. And just kind of continuing on and understanding how light and imagery and glass can all combine into thought-provoking, interesting, and effective work. And that's it.
Let me unmute myself.
You're good.
Flashbacks from when we were installing that thing. And I was terrified of,
PTSD.
yeah, I was terrified of dropping any of the plates.
I wasn't too concerned. If any fell, I had another three to back it up.
Yeah, yeah, let me get the lights on real fast. Yeah, so we're gonna open it up for questions now. So if you have any questions, just come on up here because my laptop's up here with the microphone. I also have one of Lynn's chemiograms from this project, so I'm gonna pass this around for you guys to kind of take a look at. Just be kind of careful with it because obviously it is glass. So here, we just pass it around. Cool. All right, let's open it up for questions. Just come on right up here if you have any questions about Lynn's practice and her work. Yeah.
So, and that was awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. But you said that your dual loves are glassworking and photography. Did you, when you went to undergrad, was that already, kind of your thought, or did that just kind of naturally evolve? How did that happen?
Great question. No, so I had actually, going into undergraduate, I was diehard photo. I love taking photographs. I had predominantly been obsessed with my little 35 millimeter camera, so I was still already invested in film going into undergraduate. But glass blowing I found while I was a student at River Falls. So glass blowing is a major and a class that we have offered at the school. And so a lot of my close friends were glass blowers, and I was like, hey, when else am I ever gonna get to try glass blowing? So I took one class and I fell in love with the process of it, right? One big thing about my work and just me as a maker is I'm a big process oriented person. The work and the final product is only as much as it took to get there. And so the experimentation and the tests and the process in which the pieces are created are kind of what I'm invested into. But that didn't get developed until I had graduated from undergrad. I think the um, kind of underlying passion was there, but I didn't understand how I could combine them until I went off outside of school and started working more full time.
Awesome. Thanks. And in here.
In listening to your evolution as an artist, it sounds like you are very process oriented in multiple processes. How difficult is it for you as an artist to sit there and excel in all of them if you're sitting there and you're doing so many of them? I know they're probably complementary, but having seen a few glassblowing classes myself, recognize just how challenging it could be in any one of those mediums, let alone all of them.
Yeah, no, that is an amazing point and question. Um, that was something that I've had to think about for years of how good can I actually get at all of these techniques, right? Master of one, a master of none, right? If you're working in too many techniques, how are you able to actually understand and fully invest yourself in those multiple avenues or multiple disciplines? And what I've found throughout kind of my years of working and developing it is that it's okay to not be a master of everything. Like, especially within the world of glass. Photography, I think I've developed for so long, having had those passions and the kind of understanding. But glass is not something that can be mastered even within a few years. Glass is something that takes 10 to 40 years to really become proficient at. And so I've accepted that working with other artists, collaborating with friends and peers, and even other artists that I look up to, coming up with an idea and talking with them about collaborative work. And so a lot of the times where I know that I don't have the technical capability to achieve what I'm thinking of, I will reach out to others. And that's a thing that I think a lot of artists take for granted is if the work is made by you, it has to be 100% made by you. And I don't think that that's true. I think that you can utilize other resources and utilize other artists and peers to create collaborative work that can be more effective than just an individual artist on their own. But I also tried to take some time to step away from photography to just focus on glass so that I wasn't kind of split-brained in the making of it, right? And even now I'm kind of teaching in photography and I'm making in glass, and I've kind of had to find times to separate between the two and then find avenues to bring them together. But yeah, yeah, rely on your other artists, rely on your peers, know that you're not in it alone, that other people are there to provide feedback and provide materials and uh, work within your process as needed too.
Yeah, that's great. You even outside of school, you can still be critiqued all the time.
Mhm.
So that's
Oh,
something
yeah.
I'll always kind of keep in mind. Join some groups and clubs.
Once you leave school, getting critique groups is an amazing resource to have to just continue to understand your work because so often you get so used to what your work means to you that you don't always understand what your work means to others.
Exactly. Anybody else have some questions? Yeah, come on back here. Microphone's back here, so
Hi.
Hi.
speak up a bit. Yeah.
So is photography like broad? Like it doesn't have to be like very digital where you just take pictures. Like you could use sculpting or painting along with photography because
Yeah.
me, I'm also interested in animation, and I
Mhm.
saw that photography helps with how to build and inspired characters, how to build worlds and stuff like that. So, where does your love for glass comes along with digital photography?
Yeah, great. That's really neat that you're wanting to combine animation alongside with your photographic work. There's a lot of ways in which I say photography can be a tool in making whatever you desire, right? Photography can be used in wanting to just make traditional prints, right? There's nothing wrong with the traditional avenue of photography. Or you can use photography and create maybe a print that you paint over and you add collage elements onto, right? Maybe there's elements that are protruding from the image that you're starting to push the third dimension, or you're taking your photographs and you're changing it slightly each time, like a claymation, right? And so there's different ways that you can start to combine various other materials through using photography as a tool within those processes. So thinking to your idea of animation, how could you use photography in character ideation, right? Maybe it's experimenting with playing around with different models and understanding what those characters would look like, right? For me personally, working with glass, it was a lot of changing my way of thinking because I always thought object first, right? Make the glass object, find an image that fits to the glass object. And in graduate school and in just kind of after grad school, I started to realize I needed to shift that way of thinking in my process and start with the photograph and then figure out how the photograph inspires the sculptural form. And so that's how I've kind of found that balance is through shifting my way of thinking of the process. But it works different for different material types that you're working in, right? Animation and glass may be slightly different, but it's still starting to find ways that you can use the photographic medium as a tool to achieve your goals.
Hmm. And also can like, wildlife and nature
Mhm.
fit that too? Like, is there like different rules between the art world and nature? Because I'm also into conservation and
Mm.
wildlife. So I'm just want to like understand the difference a little better.
Yeah. Conservation and wildlife, man, you got the man right there behind you who can help out with that. I know I'm kind of stuck with that one a little bit. I mean, when it comes to embracing photography and your various ideas and content that you want to derive, it's just a matter of finding what subject you're interested in, right? If it's animals and it's conservation, maybe that's the imagery that drives your animations, right? And the animations are inspired by some of those photographic animals that you're shooting in nature or whatever sort of elements it might be. It can kind of inspire from one to the next. But I always say explore, test, and experiment and find where that content can connect with your process.
Okay, thanks.
Of course.
Anybody else have any questions? I've got a question for you. So that's
Uh-oh.
something something we've kind of talked about a bit in this class is just it's the basic, just how to try to come up with the concept and how to
Mhm.
kind of get started. And so in some of our lectures, like I've talked about like Alex Stowe sleeping in the Mississippi and he did the keywords and whatnot on the post-it note. And then we talked about kind of like Matt Black, and then even Eric does the same thing. Just start shooting and see where the photos kind of lead to.
Mhm.
What would you say is kind of like your process or even some advice about, how you approach those conceptual ideas with your work? Like, where is it that you kind of start? Like, is it note taking? Is it just start making it? Is it research? So on and so forth.
Yeah. For me, it starts with the images. A lot of the times, I don't really know exactly what I'm trying to shoot or what the photographs mean until I start going through the images. So I always say just start shooting what you love to shoot, what you're interested in, whether that is people, nature, wildlife, whether that is landscapes, or if you're into still lives, right? Whatever it might be, push into that further and continue to keep shooting, and you'll kind of find commonalities, right? I do love what Alex Soth does of the like post-it note of a bunch of themes or ideas. It's an exercise that I do with my photo students as well, of like write down a list of 20 random items that you feel represent who you are, right? It's very vague. It's very hard for some students to even come up with 20 words that can represent who they are. But then I go into, okay, well, what are some hobbies, right? What are some of your interests? What are maybe some elements of your life that you could not live without, right? So those are kind of some different ways in which I always help students drive content. Is it needs to be important to you. If the content of your work isn't important to you, then why should it be important to others? And so making sure that if that is from a personal familial connection, which is what I found a lot of my work to be, even though more and more I'm finding connections within like socio-political kind of meanings and undertones, but not yet kind of jumping into those realms. Other times, your work will kind of explain and explore that for you, right? And those themes and ideas and all those words that you list out can help you kind of just understand what you're visually communicating through your photographs. Another big avenue is show your work to non-photographers, to non-artists. They're going to give you the best form of uh, unsolicited advice, I guess is a good way of putting it. But they're going to be very true of like, I don't see the meaning in that piece, right? And then you can kind of explain or explore why you have meaning in it, and then understand, okay, if they're not seeing it, how can I better represent that for a wider audience while still keeping it important to myself and what I want my work to communicate? So, long-winded answer, but a little bit of advice on how to think about concept.
Awesome, cool. Thank you. Yeah, that I think it's gonna be super helpful. They're starting working on their personal projects, which is now just whatever you want. So I think getting to hear that's gonna help a lot of people really kind of dive in. And we do something similar with the keywords, except it's with how to describe your images. So I like
Hmm.
that. You also mentioned that as well. Does anybody else have any kind of questions to toss in for Lynn about her practice or anything? I think we're all a little tired.
That's all right. If you have any questions that pop up after, feel free to reach out to me. Instagram is probably the easiest way to get a hold of me. Otherwise, you can reach out via my contact email on my website. And I'm always happy to respond to any questions or concerns that you may have. And if you have any work that you're interested in me looking at or anything, I'll be at SPE, the Society of Photographic Education, this upcoming spring in Atlanta, Georgia, where I will be doing portfolio reviews for students. So that could be a really great opportunity as well. So, otherwise, yeah, thank you guys again for having me and being receptive listeners to my work and kind of my career throughout photography and glass.
I think they listen to you more than they listen to me, so let's call it a
Don't blame them there. Just
artist club.
kidding.
I'm seeing laughs, so and I'm seeing laughs and nods right now. So yeah, there it is. There it is. But yeah, no, awesome. Thank you so much. That was really, really great to hear. And I was super excited to see the new stuff you're doing and the Curlians. I remember seeing that on your Instagram story. You
Yes,
yeah,
Chan just thinks I'm a crazy mad scientist.
you should have seen her in grad school. She was. She, she was making potions and all kinds of things.
As all good photographers should.
Oh yeah. But awesome. Yeah, but thank you again so much. I'll send the recording over to you and then I'll be in touch with you too about SPE for our plans for that as well.
Awesome. Sounds good.
So yeah, awesome. Thank you again.
Have a good rest of your guys' class.
Seven.